Welcome to the first meeting of the year of the Chemical Consultants Network. Chemical Consultants Network is a topical discussion group for people who are in the chemical industry, pharmaceutical, biotech, engineering, and related fields. We meet once a month, about 7 or 8 times a year, and we are doing presentations on. We invite speakers to do presentations on topics that are of interest to people who are in the chemical consulting. You have to introduce.
So this is Mike Becker, a former member and contributor to the group. I have with me tonight Jacob Nikolayevsky from Pacific Life, Annuities and Insurance. He's going to enlighten us on some strategic uses of annuities, different types of annuities. Him and I have worked together for about 4 or 5 years now at my investment firm, Stifel. And with that, Jacob. I appreciate.
So I very much appreciate this is the most fun part of what I get to do on a regular basis. So what I do for the last 16 years is in this industry work with financial advisors like Mike, and then through him I'm able to access a whole lot of potential clients and people who are thinking about retirement, which is one thing they don't really teach us in schools, and they probably ought to. Because it's a big topic when we have a year like we did last year in 2022, when everything seemed to be rosy for 12 years in a row in terms of the markets, and then all of a sudden you saw for the first time in history both the stocks and bond markets post a negative return. It can have people sort of white knuckling it a little bit. So the good news is that there's ways to manage and transfer and protect yourself and make sure that realistically the 20, 30, 40 plus years you will have in retirement, you can make sure that your money lives longer than you do and not the other way around, because ultimately that's the goal. So this presentation is called Create Protected Lifetime Income for your retirement, and it kind of focuses specifically on that. We're going to talk a little bit more broadly talking about creating a protected retirement. I think that's a much better topic. Now, annuities certainly can play a role, but they are not a panacea. They are not the end all be all necessarily. So we're just going to get into different kinds, why you would consider it, but first sort of start with what are the major risks that you need to be thinking about when it comes to retirement in the first place? What does that landscape look like? How should you anticipate and be thinking about your actual needs? Because everyone's scenario is different. And then thinking about the major risks that you're going to have to deal with, and of course, working with a financial advisor while we're doing that. And then there's a case study at the end, just showing you how incorporating some of these tools might make for a different picture when it comes to retirement. Because again, there's no one specific way that everyone ought to be doing this, okay? So what does the retirement income landscape mean? And I would just argue for retirement in general. I like to picture this, and it's not on this presentation, but just picture a pyramid, right? Everybody can draw out a triangle. Well, if you think back to your parents, or for me, grandparents, or previous generations, I don't know if anybody in here has a pension. Does anybody have a pension? That's 2 out of, so about 10% of 20% maybe. That's really high. About 4% currently of private businesses even offer pensions to retirees anymore, and they're constantly kind of undercutting them anyway. In fact, my neighbor used to work for Dow Chemical, and she was counting on the pension. It was going to be there, and instead they said, actually, just kidding, we're not offering it to you anymore. Here's a check for your 401k. By the way, it's worth half of what your pension would have been. So if you think back to previous, though, and how retirement was built, the base and foundation of the pyramid was the pension. That was the deal. I'm going to go to work for a company put in my 30, 40 years, and at the end of it, you're going to make sure I'm taken care of for the rest of my life, right? On top of that, the mid layer of that pyramid was going to be Social Security, right? When Social Security was created, it was never meant to provide for your entire retirement. It was never meant to provide for all of your guaranteed income. And yet that's what it's sort of morphed into, right? And then whatever was left over, that was at the top of the pyramid, right? And so if you think about your needs when it comes to retirement as from an expense point of view, the base of that pyramid is your essential, never going to change expenses. The healthcare, cost of housing, groceries, all of those kinds of things, right? Well, that matched up really nicely with pensions, which were guaranteed to pay you for life. Then the next level on that was things like luxuries, travel, leisure, those kinds of things. And then the top of that pyramid, all the leftovers, was now I'm going to be thinking about legacy, passing on, giving to charity, those kinds of things, right? Well, if you think about the landscape today, what's that pyramid look like? It's completely inverted, right? Why do companies not offer pensions anymore? Because they're really hard to predict. They're really hard to manage. So if I can push that off onto you in the form of a 401k, me as a company, I'm good. I don't have to worry about it anymore. You do the worrying, right? That's how retirement is really being done today. And so we have to make sure that our money is going to last. We do that through a number of ways, by diversifying, by investing in different options, by working with financial advisors, creating a plan for yourself. Those are sort of the tools that we have at our disposal. But the bigger point is retirement today is very different than what it used to. It's a lot more complex. That's why we're here having the conversation in the first place, right? Now, when it comes to some of the risks that we're going to have to be facing, we like to have all these fancy words and acronyms, as every industry does, but sequence of return risk, right? That's just what if you retire at the wrong time. You did everything right, but then the markets shift out from underneath you when it comes time to take distributions. We're going to talk about that, talk about inflation, very relevant today. And then, of course, just living longer. People are living longer, and how does that affect our savings and how long we can make that last? So here's something that we offer, but this is why Mike is here, is determine what your goals are. And how do you do that is you have a coach, right? If you think about playing sports, if you think about any other aspects of life, when you worked with someone who's a mentor, personal trainer, whatever that case might be, you find somebody who's, I try to surround myself with smarter people than me, and I have them help me through that. That's the point here, is you outsource these kinds of things, work with him to, or an advisor yourself to figure out what your picture is. What are your essential expenses? What are your nice to have? How much risk are you comfortable with, right? How much income are you going to need? Those kinds of things. And we have some tools as well that can help you determine what those are. So this is just an example of what something like that, a very simplified piece could look like. What are my essential expenses? Housing, utilities, food, right? I'm going to need X amount of dollars. In this example, it's $75,000 a year. But I might only have an expected income of $38,000. So now I have an income gap, right? So the question is, how do I fill that gap? How much of that gap do I want guaranteed? How much am I comfortable putting into lower cost instruments that are linked to the market? Those are the kinds of things that we can help to try and navigate, right? In this example, this client has $800,000 of savings, 401k, investment assets, what have you. And so then there's a whole lot of fancy math that we do to say, okay, you're going to require 4.6% distributions per year. It's going to require you to depend on your, in this case, line D, which is your non-guaranteed investment. So 50% roughly of your retirement is going to be dependent on something that can go up or down during retirement. Are you comfortable with that, right? Those are the kinds of questions that we're talking about. So there's ways that you can make adjustments if for whatever reason, like last year, market's down 20%, you're going to have to adjust. So you can spend less although I don't know many people that like that. Some people go back to work, which might be an option, but some people don't want to do that. Or in what we're talking about today, some people will reposition a part of their portfolio to make up for that pension or safety piece that used to be there but isn't today, right? That's what we're here to discuss. That's frankly what annuities and insurance are meant to do. That's why they exist. So I like this slide because a lot of folks, and I've had this giving these kinds of talks, they do sometimes just ignore that. So for example, I remember I gave a presentation similar to this, and we were talking about longevity, and there was a gentleman there who was right around 75 years old, and he piped up and he goes, 20 years ago, I never thought I would have made it this long. Right? So you can't just ignore the risk. You can't just bury your head in the sand. You got to plan for it. It's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's an exercise that you have to do. And again, lifetime income or protection might be part of that conversation. So those risks, we're going to get into a little bit more, just 3 of the big risks that you need to be thinking about. Sequence of returns. Again, did you retire at the right time or the wrong time? Inflation. We can talk about that, but anymore, just going to the grocery store is kind of outrageous. This time of year, a little bit about me. My favorite, if I have to anything at a grocery store, are pomegranates. For some reason, I love them. My kids love them. $3.50 for one. For one. I don't buy pomegranates anymore. Right? And then longevity, as I meant in the story, right? People live longer than they actually think they're going to, and you don't want to be caught in a position where, oops, I didn't plan for a long enough retirement. So this is all that sequence of returns means. Sequence of returns just means that while you're growing money, and this is not on the slide, but while you're growing, it doesn't matter in what order your returns come in. If you have a 20% up year, followed by a 10% down year, followed by a 5% up year, and at the end of the growth period, you ended up with an 8% return on average, you get to the exact same dollar amount as somebody who had a -10, -10, -10, -10, up 40, and then the math ends up being the same. 8 is 8 on the way up. That is not the case on the way down. When you start taking money out from your investments, if you start at the right time, meaning if you start taking income as the market is growing, you end up with significantly more money than if you start taking money out when the markets are down. So the easy exercise is, if I have $100, just visualize this. If I have $100 and now I lose 50%, I have $50 left. What percent return do I need to get back to my original 100? 100. What do most people think the answer is? 50. That's not going to get you there. That's why retiring at the wrong time can really affect how much people end up with in retirement. And that's the difference between a blue, happy experience versus a yellow, uh-oh, we need to be thinking twice. But by putting some pieces into play, some protection into play, you can help to mitigate or even avoid that altogether. Of course, inflation, as we just talked about, everything is more expensive than it was. Inflation, the last year was the highest it's been since the 70s. Non-issue, yeah. Yeah, we were averaging about 2.5%. Now we're excited that it's down. We're only having about a 5% increase, right? Hooray, that's great now. It's a lot more than it used to be. Now, there's some really great calculators and tools that are available, and that's what this slide is talking through on our website, that you can go in and you can see how much does a dollar today need to be in 5 years, in 10 years to be the equivalent. That's why we say it's so important to actually be invested, because you can't just sit out all on your own, because if you're losing to inflation, your money might feel really safe, but it's a safe way to go bankrupt in the long run, right? And then finally, how long are you going to live? Now, everybody, most people, let me say, is aware that in the U.S., life expectancy hovers around age 81. However, that's only 50%. That's the median. That's the middle. That means that 50% of people are going to live longer than 81 and 50% of people live less than 81. Can anybody here tell me when they're going to pass away? Not really, right? It's an unknown. You don't know. So the idea is you have to plan for well beyond so that you have enough to last.
What do you recommend planning for? How much is like one thing much you
So the question is, for those on the call, how long do you recommend planning for? One standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, whatever you want to call it. How far? Most of the time we plan, and when we do financial plans, we're planning for about 100 years old. Now we do. You're planning for a 40+ year retirement.
I mean, if you're 65,
yep.
Your life expectancy is going to be different
yep.
when you're 40 or when you're
correct.
4, right? Because you don't get, because you survive that long, your life expectancy every year is going to be survive longer. Your life expectancy is going to get shifted.
Correct.
Right. So, but I still can go ahead and say, hey, I'm 65 years old, and my life expectancy is 81, plus or minus. It could be as much as 90. I don't think the problem with going up to 100 is that you are. It's very unlikely that you're going to make 100.
Right.
So it's being overly protected. I mean, so what I'm saying is that if you're going to be living for like let's say 90 years. Mm-hmm. Until you're 90, which is well beyond the life expectancy, still well short of 100. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a crappy life because you were safe for 100 years. Right?
Well, that's
because 100 years is 35 years from 65. In a year, this is only 16 years. You're going to have a heck of a lot better life living for 16 years than for 35 years.
Sure, if you only have a fixed amount of dollars to live on, right? So essentially, just to recap, because I'm not sure if everybody heard on the call, the question is, well, is 100 the best age to plan for? What if, are you going to have as nice of a lifestyle because you have to stretch your dollars to last longer versus less? I don't think there's no magic bullet to it, right? That's why we talk about potentially adding
a very personal decision.
Right. Sure.
And of living face to face, you approach 75. Start small.
It's an option, but I think Mike's answer is the most accurate, which is Peter, you need to plan for what you're comfortable with. You need to plan for what's appropriate for you, because what's appropriate for you isn't necessarily appropriate for me or to Fred or to anybody else. That's why we have the conversations, and it's not enough to just say, well, here's the number and plan to that number and now you're done, right? Because some people aren't going to be comfortable with planning just to age 81 because maybe they have longevity in their family. My wife's family, most people lived into their late 90s. My family, most people stopped around 85, right? So there's those kinds of factors. The other factor when it comes to life expectancy is actually the older you are, the higher your life expectancy becomes.
Yeah, the industry knows, insurance industry knows, actuarially speaking, that if a married couple make it to 65, both make it to 65, there is a better than 50% chance that one of them makes it to the early 90s. Better than a 50% chance that one of them will make it to the mid-90s. Really? Yeah. And because 81 is from birth. Life expectancy is from birth. Correct. So there's all sorts of things that happen in life to people, unfortunately.
Right. So that's how if you peel back the layer, that's how insurance companies are really good at being able to create policies, because when you do what's called risk pooling and you take hundreds of thousands of people, you've got the statistics that end up kind of centering all around the same place. So they're okay offering policies that some people are going to use, some people aren't going to use, what have you, because it's pretty easy for the insurance, not easy, but the insurance companies are able to zero in on about where people are going to use benefits or not, the average. Whereas you and I on our own, it's hard to do. You had a question?
Yeah. That's up to 8 out of 10. So, Liz Morris. You actually take out a big insurance policy when you're keeping insurance. Oh, yeah.
So your question is very appropriate because this is the next slide, which is a perfect example of somebody who lived to 122 years old. Did I do my math right? And that's not the average person, but that person probably, Madame Jean probably hoped or wished, looking back, that she had planned on her 90 or 100 years of retirement. So actually, that's the backstory to her specifically. Is exactly right. She married somebody who bought land, and because she had outlived him and took onto it, her rental income and property income from that ended up becoming so much so because of the appreciation and prices and everything that she was fine. But I'm not pretty enough to, find somebody to do that for. So, okay. So, basic challenges. What are your goals? What is available to you in terms of types of solutions? That's what this slide is showing. So, are you concerned about longevity? Well, traditional investments, there isn't any guarantee, right? A stock can last you forever, or a stock can go, it can go GameStop on you, right? It can do those kinds of things. So there's no certainty when it comes to outliving or providing you income for life or growth for life. Traditional investments are really great, though, at combating inflation, right? The number one investment when it comes to outpacing inflation is stocks, equities, investing in companies. I took this line from somebody is, you invest in the way you beat inflation is by investing in the companies that create inflation, right? But with that, there's a lot of risks, right? There's a sequence of return risk issue because it's not a straight line. There's ups, there's downs. Can you hang on? The average investor underperforms their own index. There was a study that Fidelity did that looked at all different types of investors. And the question was, well, what is their personality trait? Is there something that kind of determines the best type of investor who makes the most money? Well, at the end of the day, the number 1 and 2 best performers were people who had passed away and people who forgot they had an account. The point was, the less messing around, the less paying attention, the less emotional reactions to it, the better performing it was. The point is that it's counterintuitive. Investing is counterintuitive, right? However, there's ways that you can protect yourself. There's annuities with living benefits, it's called. So for example, you can pay an insurance company to say, hey, I still want to invest in the stock market, but I want you to add a pension for my that's going to be guaranteed no matter what, that as long as I live, and also as long as my spouse lives, what have you, we are going to get X amount of dollars every single day no matter what. Now that's going to cost you more than the traditional investment does, but it makes sense because you're paying for certainty. No matter what, I'm going to get X amount of dollars. So it's way easier to plan when it comes to income gaps, expenses, those kinds of things. There's also other protected solutions. It doesn't all have to be income focused, right? Some people aren't comfortable with risk, yet a year ago, what were CDs paying in the bank, right? who was excited to get 0.2% on their, bank savings account, right? That was a big deal. That was a big deal. Well, there's other things that are out there as interest rates move up where now you can get, 3%, 4% over the next 3 years, and it's 100% principal protected. There's other types of annuities called fixed indexed annuities where you're guaranteed not to lose, and you can participate in the growth of the market, but you're capped. So you can earn up to 9% with no downside. What are you giving up? If the market's up 18, you're still only up 9. But that's the trade, right? I'm willing to trade a little bit of upside for making sure there's no downside. And now there's the next iteration, the new iteration, we call them buffer annuities, where it's a similar idea where now you're not necessarily limited on the upside, and the insurance company, sometimes for a fee, sometimes without, will absorb the first piece of the loss for you. So if the market's down a little, you don't feel it. But if the market's down a lot, you share in that loss. So there's a different iterations depending on what your goal is. Your word is buffered. Buffered. Or structured. But buffer is the sort of is the reason, right? Well, it makes sense, right? I'm absorbing some of the loss, right? Yeah.
So buffer is something different,
Same idea? Downside protection, loss absorption. Loss absorption, right? There's those kinds of pieces. This is just a really nice chart that I think shows you that there's really no such thing as certainty when it comes to income in life. What this is tracking is a traditional, I would say moderately, the blue is, dark blue is a 75% stock to 25% bond portfolio, so sort of a growth-oriented portfolio. The gray, more aggressive. The gray is about a balanced 50-50, and the green is a much more conservative portfolio. So one would think intuitively that, well, if I'm in the green, I should have a much more consistent withdrawal experience as I would in the blue. And the reality is that because of interest rates, because of performance, I mean, it looks like an earthquake went off here, right? There's a lot of volatility, which is why having this kind of discussion, incorporating some of the guarantees, might be a way to smooth out over time what that experience is like. So look, the bottom line is there's no specific way to do it right. There's no one investment instrument that's going to be the perfect one. You have to have growth. It also makes sense to have some balance because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but you also got to be thinking about, will I be able to stick with this plan in the long run? Will I have to revisit? You probably will. I'm going to have to revisit what this plan looks like. Do I want some of these loss cushions or avoidance or risk transfer type of instruments in my portfolio? So, sure.
So, some of us remember 70s.
Yep. Yep.
And so it stopped in 2015. That's fine. I'm speculating in my head about where it goes. Okay, so from 80 forward.
Yes.
When Volcker shut down the economy.
Yes.
And you went from 15% inflation in mortgages. I had a 14% mortgage.
Right.
And over 4 decades, it dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped to zero.
Yes.
Arguably negative.
Yes.
And then at some point, we're going the other way.
Correct.
So any idiot makes money in a stock market where interest rates are coming down.
Yes.
So we're going the other way.
Well,
So
I would let me correct what one thing that you said. So, stock markets, when interest rates are going down, when you have a balanced portfolio, when you have some bonds in your portfolio as interest rates are going down, will tend to have good performance because you have as interest rates go down, bond prices increase. That's the relationship. There's an inverse relationship between if interest rates are going up, what happened last year? Bonds got crushed, right? So not necessarily everyone was 100% in stocks, which is why you saw over here in the 2000s and really since the last 30 years or so, the ability to take a whole lot more income because, like you're right, you could close your eyes, throw a dart at the ticker symbol, and you were right. It didn't matter. So.
I'm not sure, I mean, the discount, the net present value of the lower interest rate. Bonds, which one is under market?
Yes.
The market is more volatile.
Yes.
But basically, I grew up in speculation.
Yeah.
And I've watched people be so proud of themselves for making great investments, when really the underlying cause is the interest rate. Okay, that game's over. And so we're in uncharted territory.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and push it, but I think we're kind of in a reset mode right now. And nobody knows where it's going to go.
So, sure, I would probably agree. Well, I mean, I would agree with that too. I would say that in response to that, probably you can't just buy and hold necessarily, right? You can't just I think that there's some place for active movement, active management, because there is going to be that volatility. So there's going to be some winners. I think over a long period of time, if you have another 30 plus years to invest, then a buy and hold could still work. But I also think that that's why the focus has shifted so much more towards planning than just try to outperform an index, because you can live and die by that sword, if that makes sense. Exactly.
So you said best performing investors are the ones who died and the ones who forgot their investments.
Sure.
And their investments weren't doing churn.
So.
But go ahead. I'm here because I wanted to hear about movies, so I'll stop in.
No. I think that you bring up a valid point. Is the best investors over a long period of time are the ones who don't get in their own way. But that isn't to say that life changes and things change, and there's going to be times that you have to take distributions. There's going to be times, so you need to have at least some sort of roadmap. I guess that's my biggest takeaway is
change their plan because of a bad calendar year in the market, right? They were holding steady, doing well, doing fine, but then, now I'm 77, and, it was a minus 20% year, so we got to change everything, right? So that's not the right move either.
I think so in 2008, 2008, I went to very fundamental understanding. But last week, my wife is fired.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's actually double dipping. She's got a
Mm-hmm.
she's fully employed. The company was bought out her business, what her on, where she was. And I realized, wait a minute, we're reinvesting in this. So what we're doing is we're showing up cash. Because by reinvesting, we're consuming what could be cash, and we have to pay tax on it. So I flipped all this switches up. And so now we're like pointing cash toward cash just because, we won't really need it, but we're charting into practical unknown. By the way, the other point when you're early in retirement, so mobile, and you can still do fun things.
Absolutely.
And later in retirement, your healthcare costs.
Yep.
That is where the real.
We say 3 stages in retirement: the go-go years,
Yep.
the slow-go years, and the no-go years.
That's from the the Bureau of Labor Statistics they don't say that, but it's the truth. You tend to spend more in your first years of retirement, but you're right, it's the healthcare at the end of the day. So again, I think all your points are totally valid. I also think that there's things that for each person have to be addressed in different ways. And the other comment which you reminded me of is the other thing that annuities can do is they can help bring peace of mind to the person who owns it, so that they don't have to listen to the news. They don't have to worry about these kinds of things. At least on that portion, I know I'm okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. That's what it is. This is just a case study. If you like, we can go into kind of what that looks like specific to the numbers. This is kind of back to that same 800,000 that we started with, where you have a married couple, they're both age 62, want to make sure their living expenses are taken care of, obviously have some portfolio protection in case the markets fluctuate, and I want to know how much income I'm going to get for life. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, but kind of back to the beginning of charting out what are our needs. Is there going to be an income gap? And eventually planning for when they're no longer working. So the idea here is we're working up through from now up 62, stop working at 70. So you can see the expected income because of George in this example who's still working goes down, and how that income gap adjusts, right? So how are you going to cover the $10,000 gap early on? How are you going to cover the $35,000 gap later on? And there's a couple of ways to do it. Do you just pull withdrawals systematically from your investments? Do you rely very heavily on portfolio as we go into uncharted waters? Or do you consider some of these income generating or protection type vehicles? And that's what this is done. So scenario one is just take the income from your investments, right? So for the next 8 years, we'll take our $10,000 of the 800, and whatever's left over, the 720,000 that's left over, we're going to average about almost 5% distribution from the investments, and we're going to hold on. And for most people that works out, but it might not for about 20%. It's actually at a 5% withdrawal rate, about a 75%, maybe 70 to 75% chance of success, which is a pretty big chance of not being successful, right? Or you add these other pieces in, and in this case, used a single premium immediate annuity, where you basically say, insurance company, here's a certain amount of money for the next X amount of years or my entire life. Make sure that I'm getting that 10,000 no matter what. So in this example, used a small portion to put into this annuity to cover that $10,000. Now you don't have to necessarily take withdrawals from other pieces, right, from the investment portfolio. Maybe another piece in a, for example, a variable annuity that's tied to a market with an income guarantee. Now my amount that I take, the 2.9%, is a lot less than that 5 on the stuff that's volatile and moving, because I've guaranteed a 5% on this other portion distribution, and I know I'm getting my 10,000 from that portion too. That's a lot of numbers to basically say on your unprotected asset, the dependence went down in terms of how much you had to take. So it's easier to recover losses if there are some. It doesn't have as much of an impact on how much you take, et cetera. So you increased and basically covered the vast majority of those income gaps simply by incorporating an annuity. The bottom line is, as we covered and really hit home on, everybody's scenario is different. So that's why someone like Mike is why people, that's why you work with an advisor. That's why you hire somebody to help you through this. It's really complicated to do on your own, right? It's hard to find the time, especially if you're working and doing all these other things, to do this other piece that's so critically important to our lives and well-being, right? Making sure you're prepared for the unknown, because some people will only live till 80 and want to enjoy life and make the most out of that, but other people are going to live to 100 and still also want to enjoy life and make the most out of that, right? So we got to make sure all scenarios are covered. And then it's almost like the investment part comes last, right? make sure that aligns with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So this one's pretty straightforward. Work with somebody who can help you, right? Bring someone in, bring in a coach, have the conversation, right? And that's it. That's sort of the bulk of what we did. So I appreciated you guys being here. Like I said, I really enjoy getting to do this because of the interaction. Are there any other questions? Anything else? Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
I said that if you're approaching days when your money is running out, you should do something.
Yes.
Why don't you start small?
Yes.
I have a better option. You rob the bank. What happens is you don't plan to get the money.
You get 3 squares a day.
No, you're going to pay, and your cost of living goes down dramatically.
That's right.
You only
3 squares a day. You got 3 meals a day and you got a roof over your head. What else? Clothes are paid for. Now,
My point is live large, and then when things are not going that well, start, just be plan. Just always be plan.
yeah, have a plan B.
Well, one of the things I found is I'm not sure what my retirement is going to be.
Yes.
Now I know it's going to be less than, I spend $100 a day. It's going to be less than $100 in real money, not normal money. It's going to be less. But is it going to be, 85%? Is it going to be 75%? What is that your thing?
So the question was, I don't know how much I'm going to spend. So where do I start? Almost. What's the average from an industry point of view? There are some phenomenal tools that are available that are at your disposal that create multiple scenarios and can input different needs and basically say, well, what if your expenses are this? Or what if your expenses are less? And also help to kind of give you a guideline of helping to estimate and then giving you a range based off of that. Does that kind of make sense?
I understand the math behind estimation, and I agree with the graphs and all that.
Yeah.
My problem is, how do I know what numbers to put? Because I have no idea how much I'm going to be spending when I retire.
Sure.
I mean, I'm assuming that the cars are going to be pretty much costing the same in real money, or is it going to be Sarah was talking about expenses related to healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
How much should I do? Because once I have those numbers, I can plug it into my box. That's the easy part. It's getting those numbers, getting the estimation. That's the tough part.
Sure.
Well, there's 2 sides to that, right? There's the inflation side. You could put on some projections on certain categories of expenses that are bigger or lower than others. So you can project that, but it's an ongoing breathing thing. You start with a plan, you set the plan in motion, and then you monitor the plan. And those first few years in retirement are when you really come to realize what are my expenses. You're right. You're not retired. You have 1 or 2 incomes. You may or may not have turned on Social Security yet, but you can put down an inflation number. You can tell yourself or others what your current expenses are, and then, all right, we don't need 2 cars when we're 75. We'll only have 1 car. Well, what does that mean for insurance, right? Is it half the price of insurance with the inflated factor already in there, right? So you have to make guesses at this point, because anything beyond a year or 2 is almost not known.
Well,
Right?
I mean, I'm talking about real money, not inflation, not a nominal money. It's because of the inflation. It's just that I wish there would be something that maybe there is, I think that is an estimation of how much I'm going to be spending. If I'm spending $100,000 a day, 25, yeah. It's going to be the logo is going to be $200,000.
Yeah. Okay, I can bring the speaker to the middle. So again, just to repeat, the question was, how do I sort of start? Where do I start in terms of estimating what my expenses are going to be when I retire? There are some rule of thumbs, right? Like I've heard 80%, you know, kind of figure for about 80% of what you were earning is kind of your target, what you want to sort of be bringing in from an income point of view to pay for things. But it's different for everybody.
I'm going to spend more on it because I'm going to travel. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. My spouse's family runs with Parkinson's diseases, so there may be a long-term healthcare situation that arises. Factor that in as a probability, right? A possibility. Right? The numbers, there is not a hard.
Yeah, it's a great.
Industry given like, okay, you spend $100,000 now when you're 65, you're going to couples who are spending $92,000 10 years from now.
Yeah, we want it to be black and white, and that's the whole problem. Is it can't be. It's not. So I'm going to bring the speaker here. Maybe we can hear a little bit better.
Yes, a comment and a question. So Peter, you are the world's expert on Peter. And so it's an anal exercise to figure out what you've been spending. But the best way to say what you're going to be in the future is to take a look at where you've been and then think about what you think will change and apply the deltas as appropriate. And there's your number.
Yeah.
I think the problem is, I think is the right. They are unpredictable things.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Disease, which will cost $7 million, suddenly shows up. What do I do?
Well, that's when you take up smoking 5 packs a day, maybe 10.
So I have the solution, but you people don't.
Okay, back to my question.
Fred, I think you're right in terms of you're your own yardstick.
Yeah, and it's hard to pull it together. But it's, if you look at, in our case, most of our money goes through credit cards or, particular flows that are predictable. And so like, I call it monthly financials, and every month I create a new tab. And so I realized at some point, well, I can just take it over years. And so, I actually have the data. It's kind of cool. What I was going to bring up, though, and an important question around annuities, which I don't actually know anything about, is the naive people here talk about money, dollars. There's after-tax dollars, and then there's all that other stuff. And you spend after-tax dollars, generally. And so what is the tax treatment of annuities?
Right.
And what are the pros and cons relative to that? I'm sure you'll find the pros, and I'm just curious if there are any.
No, there are cons, sure. So the tax treatment of annuities are no different if you're buying your annuity inside of an IRA or inside of a tax qualified account. They're identical. Anything that you kept.
I'm talking non-qualified.
Talking non-qualified, the tax, as you take distribution, you pay taxes at your ordinary income rate.
Okay.
Based on your earnings first. So if I have $100,000 that I put into an annuity,
the principal is the last thing.
Principal is the last thing that's distributed.
Okay.
So unless you use something like immediate annuity, the different types of ways to generate the income. So most often anymore, 99% of annuities that generate income are generating ordinary income producing assets, but dollars. However, while they're growing, while they're cooking, so to speak, in the annuity, they are not taxed on
Right.
any growth. So that's sort of
You trade off
You're trading off
deferral
the deferral
versus the rate.
paying the tax.
Because if it was cap gain, it would be 20% versus if it counts as income, it's more than 20%.
So the interesting thing about ordinary income and capital gains is that at the end of the day, when you take a look at your effective versus your marginal tax, so the marginal tax says that you're going to be paying
On the next dollar, yeah.
33% or
Sure.
what have you. But, I've brackets first as you move up, as you progress to ordinary income. So the IRS they're smart. They know that whether we're offering cap gain rate, the 15 or the 18 or the 23.8, or the different rates that we are, one way or another, we're going to get our hands on the taxes. So up until right around a 500,000 and plus earned income amount, your effective ordinary income, if you took all of your money out as if it were salary, versus all of your money in long-term capital gains, you're paying plus or minus the same rate, let's say plus or minus 0.5%.
But if you already have a base of a pension, Social Security, then we are talking about marginal dollars.
To an extent. Now, don't forget, though, that capital gains are flat. It's a flat tax.
Yeah.
Once you cross that threshold, you're paying 15 on that. So you're right that as you progress into the higher bracket, those dollars are taxed at the higher percentages, which is why as you go higher and higher against your income, ordinary income is less and less and less favorable. But for the average person who's, I don't want to presume what everyone makes, but let's say you're earning 200,000, 250,000, which is more than what most people earn.
Overall consultants would make more than that.
Well, that's good. That's great. Good for you. For you. I'm kidding. But for the average, you kind of comedian, but for the average person, like that's a pretty high amount. The effective ordinary income versus the actual capital gains rates, pretty dark.
Well, and I'm not here to jab or anything. I'm here to learn.
Well,
And not knowing anything really about annuities. So I've seen one of my mother-in-law. She has an annuity. It is a variable annuity. We discovered it.
Variable annuity.
So variable annuity is an annuity that actually has underlying mutual fund investments. So the investments are just like any others that you buy if you bought a mutual fund, and then you pay an additional fee on top of that to guarantee when someone passes away, they'll get no less than what they put in, or perhaps there's an income or living benefit or something like that on that. Where now, if I started with again, I'm gonna start with $100,000. I'm now guaranteed that $5,000 per year pension, even if that 100 drops to 80.
Yeah.
But if the 100 grows to 120, now my 5 is based off of the 120.
Right.
So there's movement to it, but they're probably the most expensive of the types of things that you can buy. You're going to pay a lot more for something like that than if you just bought a thing that
And there are a lot of
flavors and different flavors. So bells and whistles and different features and benefits. And
Now, my father-in-law got Alzheimer's 18 years ago, and he passed 11 years ago. And he was a master of the universe. I mean, he was a Lehigh chemical engineer, and he joined a little company that when he went out, he was president of this little company that was sub of a big company, and it was $1 billion enterprise when he left. And he wasn't compensated like CEOs get compensated, but he did all right. But when he checked out, everything's been on autopilot, which is somewhere between dead and forgotten. And so we've been on a discovery process the last couple of years, and we recently discovered a variable annuity, which part of the variable annuity is you can designate one to have withdrawals, but the trigger never got pulled. So it's just sitting there, and it's
growing tax deferred. If it's not qualified, growing tax deferred.
Exactly. And so there are, well, anyway, there's.
So usually,
No, actually, I
withdrawals
should say
fully tax deferred.
there are two different annuities. One is pension life, in that it's giving her a fixed income until she dies, and then it has no value. But its value is it's giving her a fixed income until she dies.
Paycheck every month.
Yes. And the other was Discovery, and that was there, and it's like, what is that?
So one thing I run into on a regular basis, and actually we've done a lot of this kind of work together, is annuity reviews.
because a lot of the times they kind of get bought or they get sold, and people forget that they have them, and then especially the ones that have income guarantees on them, well, you have to at some point turn those on, otherwise what's the point? So,
Well, it just grows. So,
Wait, so if he didn't know, okay, if an heir does not know, okay, that there was an annuity, that there was some investment, annuity, what happens to it?
Should be a beneficiary.
there's going to be a beneficiary on it.
Oh, so the beneficiary will be advised. Okay.
we should check to see if there was one. It probably was the Preserve thing.
So, you know, and each company have different policies, so,
But nobody knows that.
but that's the thing, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happens. So we make it a regular practice to go in and review.
It probably originally bought with intent, with a strategic use. Like I tell people, the insurance companies, the annuity companies, and Jacob, you know, they manufacture, they make these tools, right? We're the practitioners. We help implement, we help, you know, utilize them. And it's different for everyone. Not yet.
I've been at the new place for a week, so I don't have a card yet.
Well, wait, I thought you were with the manufacturer, not the vendor.
So we've been working together for the past 5 years. I've been in the business I've been doing this for, this is my 17th year. I just happened to, I start with a new company in January.
Opportunity.
An opportunity.
And you were still allowed to present the boilerplate. Here is our scenario.
This is a new company, yeah. They haven't mentioned the old company, but it's a company that I use quite regularly.
Right, they are the vendor to you that you market their product along with others. Yeah, okay. So annuities distribute income.
One version, yeah.
Okay,
I would put annuities into 3 distinct categories.
go for it.
Annuities distribute income,
Mm-hmm.
and a subcategory of that is, do you want to be tied to investment markets or not? Make pros and cons.
That's where the variable comes.
Variable versus a fixed with the living benefit versus an immediate annuity.
Right.
There's,
Which is really sort of an insurance product.
they're all insurance funds. The flip side of that is annuities protect legacy. So there's things called death benefits that you can purchase and say, I want to, look, this money isn't for me, but I want to guarantee that my kids or my charity or what have you get a guaranteed return of 5%. Or every year, if the investment does well and grows, I want to lock that number in, and now that's the most. And so there's that. And then there's different kinds of things where you can pay to, in order to offset the tax, like I can pay to say, I want a kind of a kicker at it to my growth to help offset the tax. So my 100 turns to 200, and then because I bought this benefit, I'll get an additional 20% on top of that. Right? There's different features.
So you have to pay a premium to
You
get
pay
that.
a premium to get that. And then there's your principal protected one, where most of the time you're not paying anything. You can't lose money, but you're limited on how much you can earn. You're capped on your upside.
Right.
Right? So income, legacy, principal. Those are sort of the 3 broad categories of annuities. Each has its place and pros and cons.
And welcome to Michael's firm, by the way. Welcome to Michael's firm. Your colleague. Okay, now this is a pointed, arguably unfounded, but honest question.
Go for it.
Life insurance policies are notorious for having very high commissions for people who sell them.
Yes.
Tell me about annuities.
Annuities come in 2 versions. They come in commissionable and they come in advisory fee-based, where you can enter into a relationship where there is no commission that's paid. And that's relatively new to the market. So some places offer it, some places don't. But relative to just even 10 years ago, I mean, used to be annuities offered a 10% commission for a 10-year lockup period.
I've heard like 30, 40% for like that.
Life insurance, yes, I'm sorry.
That's why I was asking.
When it relates to annuities, anymore, if you're working with a reputable firm, they, all the commissions are standardized.
Well, wait, annuities, you typically put money in.
Yep.
And then it's how it distributes back.
Right.
Versus life insurance, you're paying into over time.
Sure,
So that's the other reason for the difference in compensation.
sure, but
Land that fish, and then we'll.
so there still is, but there's still commissions that are paid for annuities. They just don't
Yeah.
come from the client.
Nobody works for free.
They come from the insurance company. If somebody comes and buys a new Pacific Life annuity, then we're going to compensate the advisor, and they have a couple of different options in how they do it. But that's why there are commitment periods. So annuities have commitment periods where
What's that mean?
what that means is you don't have full liquidity, you don't have full access to the money for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, name your flavor. Because you have early withdrawal fees, everything. Now you can all. They need to make sure that the people who are buying these things stay in these things and stay in until their fees recoup the commission, and that's the reason for surrender charges. So if you find an annuity that has a 15, and I've seen a 20-year surrender charge, those are the ones that are paying advisors 15, 20%. Whereas the ones that have 5 or 7 years, anyway, you're standardized, right? Every insurance company has to pay. There aren't many that are that much. No way, not even close. But it at least come down. Way down. The average, I see most people maybe take a 2% or something like that. It's not. I mean, it's reasonable, but it's not.
And so basically, as an investor, we're trading managed risk.
Peter, do you want to shut the webinar off? Can you bring the meeting to a close?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You don't want to abruptly
Okay. So.
All right, are there any more questions? Hearing none, I officially close this meeting. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.